Welcome to We Sing the Bass Electric, a podcast for bass lovers and music enthusiasts of all genres. Join us as we revisit some of the most iconic recordings from different bassists, past and present, discussing behind-the-scene insight and stories that made up some of the most revered albums of our time, all from a bass player's point of view. Now here's your host, international recording artist, Mr. Christian de Mesones, aka Big New York.
In the winter of 1978, Casablanca Records released the fourth studio album from the hard rock band Angel. Titled White Hot, it offered music fans a slick and polished 10-track production that introduced a more pop-sounding version of the band. Die-hard Angel fans received this offering with mixed reviews, since the band had previously been considered a hard and progressive rock ensemble. White Hot also introduced us to a new bassist, Felix Robinson, who replaced original bassist and founding member Mickey Jones. Felix brought a bold and fresh bottom to the band's sound with his standout bass tone and fast pick-style technique. Felix influenced a whole new generation of electric bass players, including myself. We Sing the Bass Electric proudly welcomes Mr. Felix Robinson. Thank you and welcome to the show. Hey.
Christian, it's great.
Yes.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. So let's start with the first question I have for you. You've been playing bass for more than 50 years. You started your musical journey in high school. How many instruments do you play?
Gosh, 50 years. Thanks a lot for that. I stopped counting the years, and I don't know if I ever really did, man. I started when I was very young. And how many instruments? You know, a lot of people took piano lessons when they were kids. I'm one of them. I took formal piano lessons from a really good instructor. And it was private lessons, a grand piano, learning all the original masters, the composers, Beethoven, Bach, Brahms. And I did that for 3-4 years. I started when I was about 8 years old. Piano. And then I picked up a trombone and joined the school band, and I liked the trombone. But then I saw somebody playing a trumpet, got to have that, went to the trumpet. Beatles came out. The guitar was, it had to have a guitar. My sister was a couple years older, so she had all the Beatles records. I just learned every song on every record. But she also had Motown stuff, so I learned everything. That was learning as guitar, Yeah. Still played all the other instruments and joined bands. But, it was hard to find bass players at that time. So I was one of the first guys in the group that I was with. I said, okay, I'll play bass. I think I paid $40. My mom loaned me the money to buy a $40 bass guitar, and that's where I started playing bass. Was in the first years of high school.
Wow. You remember the make of that bass?
Tesco.
Oh,
wait a minute.
Okay.
Was it? It wasn't a Tesco. It was one of those Japanese brands, very obscure. I have a picture of it.
Oh,
I actually put that picture on Facebook once. It was a horribly made, horrible playing instrument, but it was mine, and I played it.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool, man. I mean, I still remember my first bass, man. It was a 76, 77 Univox, which, the neck was freaking, it was so heavy, it was anyway.
Well, do you think that, I know for me, and I've heard you play, you're really a great bass player.
Oh,
but you play like a 5-6 string bass, or what do you use most of the time?
I play, my favorite is a 6-string Alembic Epic bass. But I do like my 4-string Warwick. I have a limited edition dirty blonde thumb bass, which weighs about 8 pounds, and it's just a really, really fast playing bass. I slap on it like a madman, but it's interesting on how an instrument could really affect your style. I mean, I think,
Sure.
six strings for me helped my compositional skills. But
Yeah. But you started on a 4-string, and so did I. And my
yeah,
bass played as bad, if not worse, than yours. I was young. I was still growing, and I do think that having that hard to play instrument in my hands improved my strength, for one thing, which would kind of make sense. You're playing something that's very hard to finger on. It's going to build up your hand muscles.
yeah,
But it also increased my articulation and my ability to play with all 4 fingers. At least that was part of why I think I developed technique early instead of just making sounds on an instrument. I really started playing the instrument, and quickly I got rid of that cheap bass, and I got a Hagstrom, I think it was, which played a lot easier. And then I had a Gibson, and then I got a Fender jazz bass. So I never went into the 5 and 6 string basses. I've definitely played them, not 6 string, well, other than as a 6 string, the Fender, 6 string, which is more like a guitar. It's more like a big baritone guitar.
yeah.
And I did use that on the White Hot album, by the way, on one of the songs.
You remember which song it was?
Do 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 down down down. It was one of the tunes that I added an overlay of a strict, a guitar-like pattern, because I had learned how to do that from watching Carol Kay. I hope the people listening to this who are bassists will all remember or know who Carol Kay was. A woman, looked like somebody's mom, happened to play on so many sessions, on so many hit records as a bass player. And she was known for playing the bass part and then putting a guitar, usually a 6-string bass, Fender bass, on top of that low-end piece, which gave that bass part a lot of depth, a lot of character, because she could duplicate the parts she played identically, and it would sound like one instrument instead of 2.
I didn't know that she did that. Excuse me. I didn't know that she doubled her parts. That's something. Yeah. Wow.
She was
That's
fantastic.
Cool. Learning how to sight read in those early years must have been a confidence booster. Do you feel it made a difference in your success as a musician?
Yes. Well, I did, because, having learned how to play piano and knowing what the bass clef part of every composition would be with my left hand, for me, it helped me to translate then when I started playing bass instrument, even though it was rock and roll and Motown stuff. I mean, I was tuned into where the bass register was and what worked and what didn't, along with the other instruments. Yeah, it helped. Being a reader did help me. And of course, later on, I played in stage bands and where reading was required. As a session musician, it always helped me. As a heavy rock musician, it didn't matter at all.
Yeah. And I guess, you were already working as a teenager. You were on the road. Tell us about that experience. What are some of your first professional gigs?
Well, when I was still in high school, I played in the garage bands with, friends, played parties, played Battle of the Bands. But, I was always moving up. Even in high school, I was always looking for a better gig. And I found one when I was going into my senior year. And I joined a band that had a record deal. It was a local St. Louis band. And it was managed by a guy that was in the mob. And so I joined that band. And it was all young guys. We had like 10 people in the band. It was a show band. And we ended up going to Las Vegas. This was the day after I graduated high school. My parents were flipping out. I said, Mom, Dad, I'm leaving for Las Vegas the day after I graduate. What? And of course you're not going. They didn't believe me. The day after I graduated, van pulled up in front of the house, got in the car, got in the van, we all split. And I lived in Las Vegas for the next 3 months. That's kind of a quick way to get yourself involved with the music business, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Lived in Vegas, played 5 sets a night, starting at midnight till 5 in the morning. that will teach you how to be a musician. It certainly did for me. Then I came back from Las Vegas to St. Louis, and I ended up joining this group that had a big hit record nationally, based out of St. Louis, called Bob Cuban, spelled with a K, and Bob Cuban's band. Bob was the drummer, and his band was known as the In-Men, IN-MEN, Bob Cuban and the In-Men. And, it was a classic 60s, now translating into the 70s band. By the time I joined the band, it was about 3 years after they'd had a hit record, and, the fame had kind of worn off. They had been on American Bandstand. They had the number 6 record in the country. So, there was success in that band. And when I joined it, we were still playing the hit record and doing a lot of gigs all over the Midwest. It was great training for me.
Wow.
It was a good band.
So playing in that kind of show band with a large horn ensemble just had to be like crazy fun. Are there any challenges or stories that you can share about that particular environment as a young musician?
Well, it wasn't just a regular horn band. It wasn't a high school horn band. This was a working, blue-eyed souls, what it was kind of referred to, because we were all white guys and we were playing a lot of Motown, a lot of funky stuff. And the top 10 records of the day, if you came to see Bob Cuban, it was a dance party. We did play a lot of clubs, of course. We didn't play, youth dances that often, but we did all kinds of gigs. And it was a great band. Everybody was older than me. I was by 4 or 5 years the youngest guy in the band. So, every year, I was in that band for almost 3 years. And so every year we played this huge social club event. It was called the 20th Century Club in St. Louis. And it's a black social club. I'm sure it still exists. And it was the upper echelon of society for black St. Louisans. And they when they had a party, they really did it right. They had the main ballroom in the biggest hotel in St. Louis, a famous place, the Chase Park Plaza. And so, this one year, it was an extravaganza, man. And these people came dressed to the nines, and they had a good time. We were one of 2 bands. It was us on one side of the ballroom, and the other side was Wayne Cochran and the CC Riders.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Jaco played in that band.
Jaco Pastorius. And I met him. Yeah. He blew up his amp at one point during the show. Now, we would trade sets. So we would play a set, dancing, people were dancing, they're having a ball. Then they would take over for the next set, and so the bands, we would take a break about every hour. We would all mingle backstage. I met Jaco. He was like me. He was the youngest guy in the band. And so we started talking. And at some point he came over to me, probably towards the end of the night, third set. He says, man, I blew up the speakers in my amplifier. He played really loud. And I don't remember what kind of amp he had. It was not a good amp, but nobody had good amps back then.
Yeah.
And I had a custom amp with 3 JBL D140s in it.
Wow.
At least they were durable. It sounded like crap, but it was a durable amp. So we started dragging my speaker box over to his side. Every time we would stop playing, we were not supposed to have any time. So, we had people helping us. We're humping this. Jaco and I are dragging this speaker cabinet, like carrying it like a coffin. One side of the ballroom to the other. There's people in our way. They're drunk by that point. They're, not pissed off, but they were sort of like, well, what are these 2 white boys doing, dragging this thing across the stage, across the dance floor? Anyway, that was my experience with Jaco, and then there's a kind of a follow-up for him, if you don't mind me adding, which was that when I lived in LA, this is after Angel, when I was doing a lot of session work, and I was invited to be one of the 50 people to sit in on the live recording for Weather Report when he was still with the band, and this was their famous live recorded in the studio album, which was at the Complex in Santa Monica. A beautiful production facility, and so it was a closed audience, and I saw Jaco at that event because I was invited by his management to be there, and and we didn't exactly reminisce about the good old days. He was busy; it was his show, so we just kind of shook hands. But I never became his friend. I never hung out with him that much. But yeah, there's a well-known bass player. He just had a mind that worked so fast, and so whatever he thought of, it was kind of like he was doing it in slow motion, but the rest of us were listening to it, in real time. So, very,
Wow,
very wonderful player.
that's a great analogy. So you brought up the fact of Angel. How did the opportunity come about joining Angel?
Okay, so well, I had been in L.A. recording as a session player with Phil Driscoll, who was a really well-known, still is, trumpet, flugelhorn pianist, songwriter, gospel singer. He's gotten very big. So Phil and I recorded at A&M Records. I had lived in LA for 4 or 5 months doing that album. Went back to St. Louis. I was determined to get back to LA. I mean, I didn't want to live in St. Louis anymore. I grew up there. I'd played there. I'd done everything that I had ever wanted to do, playing in the better bands and developing my ability as a bassist. I was in a cover band, a club band at the time. I got a call from this friend of mine who was he had the largest PA system in the Midwest, Heil Sound. I don't know if anybody listening to this will know who Bob Heil is. He's still around. Good friends with Joe Walsh, by the way. And he did the PA for The Who and the Stones and Hendrix and everybody back in the day. Well, when bands would come through St. Louis, if they needed a PA system and they weren't carrying one, Heil Sound would be the guys you would call. Big PA. So this friend of mine called and says, Felix, I'm doing a show at the Fox Theater tomorrow night. You really should come down here and hear this band. I said, what is it? He said, it's a band called Angel. I said, well, that's a great name, And he said, they are. They're really happening, getting a lot of press. And they're going to break, and it's going to be very cool for them. Problem is, they really need a bass player. You'd be perfect in this band. You should come and hear them. So, I went down to the show, and I stood by the mixing console or behind it and watched the whole gig. I think Stars was opening the show, and then it was Angel. And this is at the Fox Theater, the famous Fox, where they had Chuck Berry's, big anniversary gig with Keith Richards. And I enjoyed watching the band. I was obviously paying attention to the bass player, but not that much. I just wanted to kind of take it in, and I watched them, and I was impressed. They had a great stage presence. The bass did not sound good. I didn't know if he was a good player, bad player. It didn't matter to me. I was really there to kind of hear the band, see what's going on. Whatever follow-up I could find out about whether they need somebody or not was, not really the point of doing it. So, yeah, I watched Angel play. After the show, I had just bought a 1958 Precision bass from a friend of mine who had a small music store, had called me up and said, Felix, I got this bass. You might want it. I asked him what it was. He said, it's an old Fender bass. So I had gone down to his shop the day before and looked at he opens up the case, and there's a 1958, with a brass pickguard in perfect condition Fender bass. Nowadays, that would be worth $30,000-$40,000.
Excuse me, what color was the bass?
Sunburst.
Oh, okay.
Awesome. I ended up selling it to Mickey Jones. So anybody who's an Angel fan that looks at pictures of Mickey playing a 58 Precision, that's the bass that I brought to the show the night that I first heard Angel. It was that quick. I walked in carrying the bass because my friend said, well, maybe, I told him, I said, I got this bass. I just bought it. It's got to be worth more than I paid for it. And I'm put 2 and 2 together. There's a band in town. They probably can afford to buy stuff like this, and I'll make some money. And I did. And they, Mickey loved that bass. I wish I could have gotten it back from him. The road manager for Angel was the manager of this band that I had joined in LA. People all knew each other. Okay, I can't give you all the background. It would take too long. But I ended up being asked to come and rehearse, actually write songs for the White Hot album. And I ended up going to, I think it was Greg's house first, And Frank and Greg and Punky and I sat around creating the songs for White Hot. I could have demanded more writers' credit, but I didn't really think of it that way. I was helping to arrange the songs. I was creating the bass parts. Songs were coming together. That became the White Hot album. And in the interim, during that period of helping them write songs, it kind of became apparent that they needed to make a change. They offered me that job, and it was really becoming a partner in the band. It wasn't a job. So yeah, that's how I got my way into the band Angel.
Wow, it's very, very cool story. So, learning some of Mickey's bass lines, I really think that, you gave it kind of your own spin on things. I mean, you had definitely a funkier, edgier approach. And one of my favorites is the song White Lightning, especially your interpretation of it on Live Without a Net. Tell us a little bit about, that particular style of yours. It's kind of unique, kind of funky.
Well, we did two studio albums that had nothing to do with the prior format of Angel. So that was all new music, right? But when we went on tour, obviously we had to play all of the tunes that Angel had recorded up to that point, which included songs from the first three records that Mickey had been the bassist on. So what was I doing when I got on stage as I'm touring with the band and with those prior pre-existing bass parts that, sort of were really basic. And I am I'm an aggressive bass player. I'm not going to say more or less. I'm a very aggressive musician when it comes to playing bass. And here I am in a band with a drummer at that point, Barry Brandt, fast, powerful. And Barry had never worked with a bassist that was able to match him in that intensity. So I really was driving him into the dirt. And during rehearsals for the tours, I was just banging into that, taking every bit of his energy and pushing it past where it could go. I mean, we were just having a ball. So what did I do with those old tunes? You asked me about White Lightning. If people are familiar with that song, I funked it up, man. I used my thumb. I wasn't all pick. Certain tunes that I did play with Angel, I used my fingers, especially in the studio. On stage, I needed to use a pick to match the intensity of the guitar sound. And that's one thing for bassists to understand is that, you've got to be in the landscape here. If you're in a band and there's one guitarist or even two, and it's a loud performing band, a bass can get buried in that. It can turn into a tubby low end that just kind of like hopefully has some impact with the sound from the kick drum. But anybody that's been to shows and listened to the bass, pre-show where they're doing sound check and it just sounds like bah, bah.
Yeah.
I hate that sound, and I always did. So when I joined Angel, I got stacks of Ampeg amps, and man, I was biting edge in terms of my tone to match up with the guitar sound and get in there and really, get some crunch going. So, White Lightning is a good example of that. Everything on the live album is I hope, an example of that. Sort of like intensity with hitting the register in some ways on certain songs and places where it needed it. Not every song, not every parts of every song, but in places on songs where it sounds like there's two guitar players, because I was playing, rock and guitar parts on the bass upper register and still hitting low fundamental notes with my thumb. I did that a lot. I would play chords up top and be hitting, the fundamental lows on open strings.
I think it's good to be able to play with both your fingers and a pick. But you actually have developed a kind of unique technique. I mean, I think I've seen you play where you actually had a pick in your hand and you were playing with your fingers at the same time. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, people, it just gets natural. I used a large pick because of that. I used a big Fender Triangle, a heavy, so that it was easier to, hang on to. A small pick would be almost impossible to do what I used to do, which was keep the pick between my finger and my forefinger and my thumb, and then shift it back into the palm of my hand, kind of grab it with my little fingers, sort of like, and then play, with my fingers. So yeah. Plus, one of the things that I find for myself with a pick is you got to be like a metronome. And if you listen to my playing on that live album, and if you heard me now, a lot of times I'm using a plectrum to get the percussion, but I stay really close in time. I'm not going to play around with too much. It's got to be dead on, especially when you start playing fast. So "Got Love If You Want It" is one of those songs on that record that's on the White Hot album, where it's like you got to be right tight into the groove, and the pick allows you to have that transitional feel while still keeping syncopation going. So it's not just all upstroke, downstroke. Sometimes it's, I don't know. I just do it, and I've always done it. And somebody has asked me that question before, and it's hard for me to answer. I just do it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned "Got Love If You Want It," and I have a confession to make. That song was probably that and a Kiss song called "Love 'Em and Leave 'Em." Was probably the biggest, earliest influence of my development as a young bassist. And I actually remember writing an original song because of your bass line. So, I mean, I'm always feeling gratitude to you for that. Do you have any early influences, any bass players that, or musicians that made you feel that way about music in your early years?
Oh yeah. And just to touch on what you just said, I mean, you are a smooth jazz player. I mean, and that's interesting because, you had this appreciation for, and you emulated parts of type of music that I played that was certainly not smooth jazz. I mean, you've made your reputation on, horn bands and the things that, you came from. I know you had rock and roll in your background, and now you ended up with smooth jazz, but you still have that. And thank you for having that appreciation for a style of music that doesn't, it's not the same. It's different kind of stuff, which proves a point to me, which is that, and this touches on this question you just asked, which is that I think good musicians can play anything, or should be able to play, multiple styles competently. They should be comfortable playing all kinds of music and not rule anything out. Say, I don't do that. If you're really a good musician, I believe you have to have learned how to perform so many different styles and appreciate them so that you do it right, not just copy something or emulate. It's really better to feel it, So the bass players that have influenced me, a lot of the iconic names that I'm sure you would expect to hear. Paul McCartney, definitely. I mean, that was one of the first formative, times in my life when I was listening to the bass parts, learning them when I was starting to play bass. So I would play every song on a Beatles record and know the bass parts. So it had to influence me. At the same time, I was learning, Motown stuff. So James Jamerson, and then later, when music got a lot more advanced and started getting creative, John Entwistle was interesting to me. I didn't really identify too much, but he did have a really poppy sound. Remember how he would hit the strings with his right hand?
Yeah.
And do a lot of hammer-on and stuff. And, and he was good. Every bass player that I ever heard, if I could tell right away if they were really good at what they did. I wanted to learn something. I would concentrate on what they were doing. And thankfully, I got to hear some fantastic bass players. Stanley Clarke was in the studio with the guys, with Lenny White, Chick Corea, and they would come back into the control room. I watched them record, 2 or 3 hours of their sessions for that particular album, their first album. And watching him perform that close, that intimately, hearing him talk about his tone when he came into the control room, I was kind of just, sitting in the back watching this, the magical stuff happen. And it was influential for me because I could see that he was really far advanced beyond my capabilities at that time. And I figured, I'm just going to do the best I can with my talent. And I certainly have tried to do that. But, Stanley was in another world, really. Still is.
Yeah.
So I've been influenced by a lot of bass players, including upright players,
Yeah, Stanley's a great upright player also. I mean, I think he's actually, I don't want to say a better upright player than an electric player, but he fascinates me with his upright playing. And,
right.
And you just expounded on something earlier that I wanted to talk to you about, because you mentioned tone. And to me, the tone on your bass on the live album was, really extremely distinct. How was the live performance recorded, and what was your stage rig like? I mean,
stack of MPEG SVTs and V4Bs. So I had a really loud rig on stage, and I used a lot of it. Not all of it. Some of it was there for spares, because Ampeg sent a guy out on tour with me everywhere I went. There's this middle-aged guy with an oscilloscope and a bench behind my amplifier system, and I would blow up SVT heads almost every night. And he was right there. He would drag it out. The guys would unplug it, plug another one in. I barely missed a lick because I had 2 or 3 of them running all the time. And here's the deal with tone. All right, it starts, in my opinion, for me, it starts with my fingers. Mm-hmm. This is not a pedal thing. This is not a specialty amplifier thing. I just needed high volume. I did the rest with my hands. And I did use a Music Man bass, which had active tone controls. So you can't disregard that, in that I had bass treble controls that were active on that bass. And I could find the right tone combination between that and my technique, that I could make the bass go from low end growling, really loud, to less, to a softer, rounder tone. And I did that on certain songs. If you listen to Telephone Exchange on the live album, I think there was some parts in there that I actually did some Jimi Hendrix style stuff, not like a guitar, but like a bass. So, I really changed a lot when I was performing. I just did it with my hands. I almost didn't change too much in anything else. I didn't use pedals. Got a great sound coming out of the amp, and we mic'd it, and I went direct, and we had great sound then.
What size were your speakers? Were they 15s, front-loaded?
No.
What were they?
810s. 810s and an SVT, just like always.
Okay.
And 2 double 18s, I think, in the V4Bs, which were backloaded, horn-loaded cabinets.
Wow, that explains a lot. You had all that bottom frequency with the top end, and it's still, right. you came out with really little distortion, man. I mean, it was.
Well, I started doing that long before Angel, by the way, and I'll take you back to when I was with Phil Driscoll's band, and we played in some pretty big, locations. And this is before we had PA systems that were big enough to carry the bass guitar as a DI. So here's what I carried for that band. I had a V4B Ampeg amp with a big folded horn enclosure, and I had a Sun Coliseum.
I remember those.
Right, and I had 2 front-loaded 15 boxes. So I had 4 15s front-loaded, and I had the V4B. But I didn't stop there, because I didn't keep it all on stage. I would take the V4B, move it off stage, depending on the room, face it at a corner of the room. These are nightclubs, not concert halls. But I would face it in a corner in the room, away from the stage, the V4B, right?
Yeah.
And it was loud. And then my 415s front loaded with the Sun Coliseum, which was a solid state amp, and very bright. And so I would just get this round bass tone coming through the room using the acoustics of the room. Of course, later in my life, I became busy with big PA systems, as I'll tell you later. But I was sort of like creating a sound system within the room just for the bass. And so I really did always keep that arrangement, that arrangement between the low end and the high end blending throughout my bass sound.
You brought up Music Man basses, and I believe that you were probably one of a small handful that introduced the bass community to that instrument. How did the relationship start with Music Man?
You know, I was playing precision bass. I still have it, by the way. 63 precision. I had it. I put it in the shop in the hands of a guy named Carmi Simon, who was a famous guitar maker, and he was building a bass for Miroslav Vitas at the same time that he was working on mine. Speaking of other names, so you know, my regular precision bass was that I had used in the first album with Angel was now in the shop, and I needed a bass, and I heard about this Music Man bass, and it was the coolest thing out there. And I went to the Guitar Center on Sunset Boulevard, the first, and at that time the only Guitar Center store that existed. And he had I'd been there before, you know. The guy behind the counter that was the manager, I think, that day. He had one Stingray, white Stingray. I wanted a white bass. Punky played a white Strat. I needed a white bass. So I went in and I said, let me play that thing. He handed it to me. I don't think I even plugged it in at that point. I played it for about 20 minutes, 15, whatever it was. And I said, cool, great, I'll take it. But there was another guy standing next to me at the counter, and he looked familiar, and I think I knew him. Didn't really pay attention. It was Patrick O'Hearn, who was the bassist for Zappa's band. And I said, I'll take the bass. And Patrick goes, no. He says, I came here to buy that bass. Apparently he had his eyes on it as well. So, you know, it turned out we both wanted to buy the only one bass they had. And they didn't have two, they didn't have four, they had one. And he wanted it, and so did I. So there is a showdown coming. The guy behind the counter goes, well, he says, I don't care who buys it. Whoever's got the cash, put it down. You can have the bass, you know, the businessman. So I didn't have, I think it was $325. I didn't have that on me. He didn't either. I had a blank check in my wallet. I gave it to my roadie who was standing next to me. I said, go down to the Bank of America, down this just block away, cash this check, get back here now. He runs out the door. Patrick O'Hearn had a guy with him. I guess he did the same thing. He gave the guy a check or whatever it was, and both roadies go out the door. They both split. We're standing there kind of like, you know, looking at each other. What are we going to do now? Both roadies hit the door on the way back in, carrying cash. It was a you know, standoff. And so I said, well, what are you going to do now? And I think might have been the guy behind the counter or one of the roadies said, arm wrestle. So we did. We had an arm wrestle on the counter at the Guitar Center.
And you won.
Well, the bass is still sitting here in the case right here where I'm right 10 feet from where I'm at right now. Yeah, it's yellow now. Years of clubs and you know, smoke-filled studios. I mean, it's literally yellow. It's still a great bass. I use it all the time.
Let me ask you something now more updated. Your last recording, Fallen Angel, the Punky Meadows solo album, which was recorded in 2018, had you wearing many hats. What did you contribute to the album, and which basses did you use on it?
Well, thank you. Yeah, Punky had this dream, this idea of, you know, getting back active again, and I was fully supportive of that. There wasn't really a plan to start a band exactly at that point. We were just making a record. And yeah, so it turned out to be, you know, a band, and I did play with them after he got it together finally. But at the time that we made the record, there was no band existing. It was just good musicians coming in to make a record with Punky, which is, you know, was a lot of fun. I used the Music Man on a couple of tunes. We were in a studio in New Jersey owned by Bobby Pantella, the drummer, great drummer. And every time I would plug the Music Man bass in, he'd go, you know what, I can hear some noise. I mean, it's an active bass. And so back and forth, trying different things, and it's just the basses. First of all, the first Music Man basses were the first generation of the op amp, active basses. They make noise. They're noisy.
Yeah.
If you have the right equipment, of course, you can hear that stuff. So I dragged out and I had my Precision, which is a really beautiful bass, and it's not active. It's got a P bass pickups built by Red Rhodes, who was a famous pickup maker and steel guitarist. Actually, anybody want to look up Red Rhodes? Famous guy, and he made the bass pickups for that bass for me, and it has a 61 jazz bass pickup on it. So yeah, that's the bass that I used on most of that Fallen Angel album. Was the P bass.
My last question to you is about your career after Angel. You've done some great work in the field of audio and video. Can you tell us about what you're doing these days?
After I left Angel, I bought into a recording studio. I was going to take part of my my assets and invest in what I did. So I became partners with some people and built a studio on Melrose Avenue. And it was a beautiful studio. I mean, a 48 track, Studer, Trident console, lovely room, and one main room, big room. And we did a lot of work there, but I had to help build the studio. I'm literally from the ground up. We didn't buy an existing studio. We built a studio and equipped it, wired it, did all that stuff. I was working with some great engineers doing that work. I learned a lot. So the clock rolls on, and the bands that I was playing with in Los Angeles, I finally moved to New York. One of the first things I did in New York, I got married. I moved to New York, got married, started a family. One of the first businesses I went into was building recording studios in New York. I did a couple of big rooms with people from the Hit Factory here. Mm. And I continued to learn more and more about discrete path audio and correct acoustics and how to achieve really good sound, admittedly in a recording studio environment. But, that was probably the best place to learn about electronics. And I carried it forward into a career that eventually turned into some really great positions in some terrific companies. I ended up working with the largest audiovisual integrator in the United States for 18 years. And I was vice president there. And, we did, a lot of places, a lot of important installations. I could go on and on with that. All of that stuff, a lot of that stuff's on Google. Anyway, so, I stopped working with that company. I felt like I should retire. I didn't need to work anymore. I got to a point where I felt that I should really just concentrate on my health, concentrate on, my daughter, and enjoy life. And that was about 3-4 years ago. I had a health emergency that I got straightened out, but, it taught me that I needed to spend more time just doing good things. And, but I ended up getting an opportunity to go to work for Clair Brothers, which is a world famous touring sound production company. And I'm working with them now, starting a integrated systems, which means installed sound and video division. So in addition to doing the big tours, which are right now kind of dormant because of the virus pandemic, but it will start up again. Claire is going to have this super integration capability worldwide because they have offices all over the world, and I'm part of that team. That's what I'm doing, man.
Check that out.
And I'm continuing to play. I keep playing. Still looking for a gig.
You know what, man? That's why it's great to talk with you, man, because, just the fact that you had music in your life, you're continuing it, you're still making it, and you're still involved in the evolution of it. I mean, you've been a great guest, Felix, and I think the bass community really has a lot to learn from your wisdom and your years. So
you're very kind. Thank you, Christian. It's nice to talk about the instruments and the performing on the instrument part of what I've done. Usually people just want to talk about certain bands, Angel or White Lion, band that I was in for the first album that they did. That didn't end well, another story. But that's all behind us now. So,
Yeah, I know.
thank you for having a program. I know you're going to do very well with this. You're going to have a lot of great bassists, a lot of great musicians on your program. You're a great musician. It's a perfect, natural thing. You should be doing this. And thank you for inviting me.
I thank you for your time, man. And we'll keep in touch, and we'll revisit someday in the future, man. And maybe we'll have you back on.
Good enough. Be well.
All right. God bless you, man. Take care.
Take care. Same to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.